Hello everybody, you ready for Demings 14 points? We're talking about Demings' system of profound knowledge, so we're going to kick off right here talking about the 14 points, the 7 deadly sins, and this opens up homework 6 if you can believe it or not. Let's take a look here. So homework 6, I'm going to call it stories of success, stories of failure, and the deal here is each team member is going to recount an experience that demonstrates an example of either one of Demings' 14 points, and that's kind of how it's done right then, would be the example, a positive organizational experience, or a negative organizational experience that can be best explained by one of Demings' 7 deadly diseases. So your team needs 3 from each of the 2 categories, right? So 6 team members. I want 3 examples of deadly diseases. I want 3 examples of the 14 points in a positive aspect, and there's no duplicate points. So this is another kind of team level decision that you have to make. You have to consider the examples you have to discuss within your team, and then you have to choose who's going to do what. Now on Carmen, there's a template set up to organize and also to be turned in as part of the assignment. So that is, you're going to indicate your name and whether you've chosen a positive or negative, and notice that this is 3 each, so 3 of you are going to go positive, 3 of you are going to go negative. If there's a 7th of you, if you have a team of 7, then you're going to add 1 more, and your choice, positive or negative, so it would be 4 and 3 or 3 and 4, your pick. Lengthen the table to accommodate that. And then list Demings' point or disease. And I want you also to list the date of the selection. So really I'm looking at you meeting the assignment deadline as specified in Carmen. But the date of selection's got to be several days prior to the assignment deadline, right? And one thing that I want you guys to do on your teams is to commit to making decisions that allow you enough time to complete the assignment. So this date selected is the interim date that you made the selection, right? And this is how I'm increasing accountability. I'm monitoring this. This is next to your name. So hey, there I am, Mark, and use your last name too. I selected a positive experience, Demings' 8th point, right? Drive out fear. And then the date selected, I selected this on September 9th in preparation for an assignment due date of September 23rd or whatever, right? So that date selected is the date that you committed to get started on this point, the date that you made selections. This just illustrates the importance of interim deadlines. That is, processes are usually multi-step, so let's have a deadline for each step along the way. Okay, so that's what that's for. Right? Now, for each selection, 2 paragraphs should suffice, and everyone always wants, how long should it be? So what I want you to do then is describe the situation, let's say in the first paragraph, and then the second paragraph, make your case for your application of that point or that disease, right, of the 14 points or the 7 diseases. Okay? Do it in a clear, complete manner. I don't think it should take more than 2 paragraphs. And you'll see the assignment on Carmen it's set up for you to do that, right? So, you ready to go? Let's talk. What are Demings' 14 points? The 14 points were originally presented in Demings' Out of the Crisis in 1986. And it's an amazing book, and U.S. industry was certainly in crisis mode coming out of the 70s. Let's face it, in the 1980s we saw, there used to be 4 auto manufacturers in the United States, right? We know them: General Motors, Chrysler, Ford, and notice this of the big 4, the number 4 died before you guys were born, and at least most of you, and that was American Motors, right? And they just croaked. They couldn't compete. We got our ass kicked starting in the 1970s by the Japanese auto manufacturers. They followed Demings' principles. They were tight with the customer. They anticipated the future. Meanwhile, the American auto manufacturers is basically a case of no, I don't want to hear nothing. I don't want to hear about gas prices. I don't want to hear about smaller cars. We're going to do things the way we've always done them before. And really, the American auto industry just drove all their cars into the collective ditch. It's a wonder any have survived, right? No, it isn't, but because we saw the story of Pat Kerrigan and General Motors parts plants, we've seen Ford make tremendous gains in their manufacturing processes. But remember, the Japanese came to town with a better product, it was a cheaper product, it was more efficient on gasoline, and it was more in tune with the needs of the American public. They kicked our ass, right? And Deming is in part responsible for that, for better or worse, however you want to look at that, right? So the 14 points were originally presented in Deming's Out of the Crisis. What crisis? A manufacturing crisis in the United States. They deserve a thorough discussion, right? And what follows is a rather pallid distillation. Obviously, in your book, there's far more descriptive far better description of these points. The 14 points represent the philosophy, consistent actions that can lead to truly transformational leadership, and that's what we're about. Worker performance and attitudes transformed and really underlie the principles of continuous improvement. Deming's points appear to be largely applicable to a vast number of domains. This can be done in education, and you see it happening in education during your time at Ohio State, I hope. They can be applied to manufacturing, to the service sector, to the military, really kind of anything that we can think of in terms of operating as a system. Right? So let's get started, and you'll see that in black underlined, these are live links that will take you to the website Deming.org, right, where there's further explanation and examples of these principles. So let us get started. Point number 1, and you can see W. Edward Deming there in the picture, a relatively young Deming, right? Create constancy of purpose towards improvement of product and service, and the aim to become competitive and to stay in business and to provide jobs, right? So all of those go together. Constancy of purpose means that we're going to have everyone rowing in the same direction, and this is where vision and mission goals, as we've described earlier in the course, become all important because they represent the vision, and the constancy of purpose is to strive towards that vision on a daily basis. That is the target, right? So, and this is what's going to benefit as a result of that. Number 2, awaken and adopt. Adopt the new philosophy. We're in a new economic age, and we continue to be, right? Western management must awaken to the challenge. They must learn their responsibilities, and they must take on leadership for change, right? And we can see that even though these points have been expressed through the 70s, 80s, etc., when we have an economy where clearly 10% of the population controls 92% of the wealth, the constancy of purpose is greed. We're talking about doing something different, much differently here. That is putting people first, and that's the people who do the work rather than the few select few who then just seek to operate organizations in a way that enrich themselves. Right? I mean, I'll get political for a minute. You know, when we look at the United States Postal Service as it's being run now, or run into the ground, how can you justify eliminating automated sorting machinery? How can you take expensive automated sorting machinery and just rip it out of the post office? How is that going to enhance efficiency? What exactly is the purpose? Is it to do things at a lower cost more efficiently? With a lower error rate? Does it make sense that we rip out automated machinery so we can go back to hand sorting mail? Which is going to lead to more mistakes, less efficiency, and higher costs. What is going on there? Notice there is little constancy of purpose there. There is something going on that is for individual needs and purposes. So, let's think in terms of increasing the level of quality, increasing the efficiency, right? That's what we're about. Number 3, cease dependence on inspection, right? And typically in American industry and service industries, right, we get that little thing at the end of filling out, ordering something on a website. Hey, we would like to check on your experience, right? But notice these things, measures are being taken after the fact. At the paper mill, this is devastating. You know, the quality control inspector comes along, right? Let's say, for example, and he comes along my production line where I'm packaging paper, and he grabs this ream of paper and says, "Mark, this has the wrong label on it. How long have you been running this?" And I'm like the last 2.5 hours. Well, now we go downstairs to the warehouse, and what do we find? We find literally 15 tons of paper that's been mislabeled and all has to be reworked. Okay? Mass inspection is not the way to go. We got to build the inspection into the process so that we don't develop these huge amounts of rejected quality. So cease dependence on inspection to achieve quality. Eliminate the need for inspection on a mass basis by building quality into the product into the first place. So we have to create a system that prevents the defect from occurring in the first place and continually improve that system, right? Supplier relationships and the practice of awarding business on the basis of price tag. And this gets back to constancy of purpose, right? Instead, minimize total cost. That is, if we have to pay, let's say, a little more for a component, but the component can be demonstrated to be of higher quality, less variability, that is more consistent in the way it was manufactured, it can actually improve our process over the long run. So being cheap can often lead to higher costs at some other place in the operation. Now this becomes problematic because we may say, we may employ a buyer, someone who buys raw materials for the company, and we say, we want you to reduce the expenditures by 10% this year. And so the buyer then works diligently, following orders, to find the cheapest contracts they can. But then the materials they're purchasing may not function as well in the machinery that's being operated. So in fact, then we see slowdowns of production, we see more rejects, and in fact, the overall cost of the product that we're creating has gone up because some minute segment of the process determined to reduce its costs, but at the expense of the other downstream processes. So really, what Deming is saying is here, move towards a single supplier for any one item on a long-term relationship that builds in loyalty and trust. So loyalty and trust come first. And one thing that we found at the converting plant, at the paper mill, was the person who supplied us our cardboard was selected because it was a Boise Cascade box plant that would feed the boxes to our paper plant. But they had serious quality issues at the box plant. So although it was in-house and it was cheaper, because of the inferior quality of the product, it raised the cost of the ultimate final product. So we need to begin not to award contracts on the basis of who takes me out to lunch or who plays golf with me or any other happy horse shit, but can you demonstrate your continuous improvement of your process manufacturing the supply that I would like to purchase from you. So often you build relationships where you teach quality. It may be necessary for you to go into your suppliers and teach them quality and specify what measures you need to assure the quality of the product that they're delivering to you. It's a more holistic relationship, and it's built over time, and it's built on the basis of trust, not cost. Okay? Constantly improve. Improve constantly, forever the system, production and service to improve quality, productivity, and thus constantly decrease costs. And we know that as quality goes up, costs go down. Now let's return to the assignment for just a minute. Let's take point 5. Let's suppose that you have worked or taken a class or something, whatever, that represents, and you can demonstrably say, wow, this process was being continuously improved, right? Then describe that situation and tie it to the constant improvement point number 5, right? So tell the story, right? Tell the story and make the case that it demonstrates point number 5. So that's how you're going to do your assignment. Training, institute training on the job. Training, and more training. I can't, when I first went to college while I was working at Boise, they said, well, pay 75% of your tuition. And I said, wow, that's really cool. I think I will actually go to college then at the ripe old age of 36 or 37. I started college. My major was organizational communication, which seemed appropriate for what I was doing or what I was planning on doing. And my minor was training and development. So it was learning to design trainings, it was learning to implement trainings, and one thing that was profound that was taught to us was JIT, which is just in time. So we would do trainings for people. We would design the trainings, but implement the training just before the person was going to use the skills that were trained. So they got to practice them immediately. We didn't do training, you know, oh, we're going to train you now and you might use this training 6 months or a year from now when you've forgotten it. So we became very efficient in our training. Another thing I learned that was weird about training, and I remember one of my teachers telling me this, she said, if your trainee can't do it, you have failed. And I think that's a good thing to keep in mind for training. If you develop a proper training system, it's well executed, right, then every one of your trainees will walk away being able to do the skill. And the one exception I can see is if they were misselected for that position. But if the selection process was appropriate and they're qualified for that position, you as the trainer, right, either succeed or fail. The trainee does not. The trainee gets it, right, and that's your success. Different than academia, and I often question, should it be different? Institute leadership. And I think this is of critical importance for us here at Ohio State. You guys are the future leaders. Institute leadership, and we're going to see point 12 in a little bit. The aim of supervision should be to help people in machines and gadgets, and notice he likes that word, gadgets, do a better job. That's what we're about. It ain't about the machine. The machine doesn't come first. It's the people using the machine. So what we're trying to do is enable the people to do a better job, right? Supervision of management is in need of overhaul, as well as supervision of production workers. So you may be on that kind of third level where you manage the supervisors, right? Well, the techniques that you use need to be improved, as well as every other aspect of the organization. Now, we've talked about, you know, in the previous little lecture about Deming being a psychologist and recognizing the importance of psychology, which I think is pretty cool for a freaking mathematician, statistician, right? Drive out fear so that everyone works effectively for the company. You shouldn't be afraid of losing your job. You shouldn't be afraid of competition, right? To the extent that people experience fear, they become less creative. They're less willing to take chances. Remember, when you're creative, you're taking chances. You're doing something that someone has never done before, and that guarantees failure some of the time. If failure is not tolerated, that is, if we're frightened to fail because we may lose our job or be demoted or set aside, then we won't tackle creative endeavors. We'll stick with the tried and true. And that's only to the detriment of the organization. So ultimately, drive out fear. People, you know, Pat Kerrigan, what did she do? Pat Kerrigan had an open door philosophy. You come in, you can say anything. Right? Drive out fear. Okay? Break down barriers. Okay? Between departments. People in research, design, sales, production must work as a team to foresee problems of production and in use that may be encountered with the product or service. So everyone has a voice. One of my favorite stories, kind of a crazy thing, two people I went to graduate school with, Amanda and Ori. And it's funny because we were in the same lab. We were all in the Tetlock lab. Ori was a year ahead of me, then there's me, and Amanda was the year behind me. And we did a lot of work together. Amanda and Ori now operate a company called Strategy Team here in Columbus, Ohio, and it's a survey research firm. That's what it started as. It's much more than that. But I remember Amanda was telling me about this one focus group she was operating on behalf of White Castle. And I don't know if we're supposed to talk about this, so don't tell anyone. But White Castle had launched a bacon burger. And they decided, for the ease of manufacture, etc., they decided to use Canadian bacon. And what do many of us Americans call Canadian bacon? Yeah, ham, right? So who puts ham on a hamburger? Well, it was a flop, right? And you know, it was a flop, and White Castle spent all this money on doing this. They spent just, you know, literally millions of dollars to bring this product, put it in the restaurants, and then it didn't sell. And then they decided to have a focus group to find out what went wrong. Now, when you think about it, that's pretty absurd, because when should you have the focus group? When you're designing the product to see if the customer will purchase it or not. You don't have the focus group after. Part of the lesson is you have to get tight. You have to have an intense relationship with your customers so that you can meet their needs, you can anticipate their needs, but don't try to necessarily create a need that they're not going to buy into, right? People in America want bacon and strips. That's bacon. So they want strips of bacon. I don't care if it's a little harder to assemble burgers. If the customer's not going to buy a Canadian bacon burger, right, a hamburger, if you will, then you're going to have to go and use a strip bacon. Or maybe your customers don't want it at all. And then who's your supplier going to be? And what is their cost? So note that if you want to embark on this, you bring in customers, you bring in potential suppliers, you bring in the workers who actually have to assemble the burger. You get as much input as you can to understand what it's going to take to make this work. So break down barriers, use collaboration. Hang on for part 2.